Hi, I'm Dr. Duncan Markham.
And I'm Dr. Debbie Loakes, and we're from Ear and Speak in Melbourne, Australia. And we're going to try something new for this video today. Duncan's got a bag of questions, and we're going to try and answer it.
So let's see what question comes out first. Why is it hard to change your accent?
Okay.
That's a good one.
It's a very good one.
I'll put that to one side. There are many reasons, aren't there?
So some people feel that they don't have an accent, but
Lots of people think they don't have an accent, yes.
everybody has an accent.
Everybody, because everybody speaks in a way where you can identify something about their background, where they live, where their parents came from, all sorts of possibilities, but everybody has something which makes them identifiable. So everybody has an accent. But lots of people want to change their accent in order to sound more like the place where they live, for instance.
Exactly. So at Ear and Speak, we have many clients coming from different countries all around the world, and they come and visit us because they want to work on their accent.
Exactly, they want to change something about their pronunciation. Now, it's difficult because most people come with at least one first language.
Yes.
And your first language creates all these expectations about how language works.
Exactly. And so one of the things that we talk about when we discuss people's accent is that most of the experiences that they've had throughout their life, they're building on those experiences constantly, and so people tend to use what they're most familiar with.
Yeah, so if you're used to hearing a certain vowel in a certain way, or a certain range of variation in a vowel, and categorizing it in a particular way, that must be an e. If that's what your first language does for a certain range of possibilities, when you try and learn something in English that sounds similar but actually isn't, it can get pretty confusing.
And sometimes it's useful to think about it a bit like colour perception.
That's a good one.
We can think about blue and what you've experienced as blue, and then you come across a colour that is possibly what we call aqua, where it's got some shades of green.
Exactly.
Do we call it green or do we call it blue? And people's experience dictates how they'll...
So, for instance, men famously are really bad at describing the colours of paint and clothes and things, right?
Sure, yes.
And whilst that sounds a little bit sexist and it's a bit of a cliche, it is kind of true a lot of the time. And this is because, in this case, it's just a case of labels for things that you can see. With accent, it's much more complicated. It's about how you hear and process things that you're not even aware of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's step one in why learning an accent or changing an accent is difficult, because your expectations and your habits bias you to hear things in a way which the speaker of the other language doesn't do. So what else is there? Well, learning to control the articulators. Yeah. So if you're trying to do a sound you've never done before, a good example is th, for instance, you might eventually be able to learn it. In fact, with that one you probably will be able to. But it's very unfamiliar for people when they first start.
And I guess another good example is the sound.
Oh, yeah, an R in English, yeah.
Yeah. And it's done in very different ways in different languages and in different varieties of English.
Precisely. So you might, in your own language, your first language, have something that people think of as an R, but that could be a R, or it could be a R, or it could be a R, it could be all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, none of those work in English. And yeah, like you were saying, different varieties of English have slightly different R's as well. If you speak Australian English, you think of your R as being fairly normal. And you think of it actually as not being too different from American English, except we put it in a different place.
Yes.
But then if you go to certain parts of Britain, the R is almost like a W.
Exactly.
Like, very common, like, are you ready?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's so common now.
It's very different from Australian English, ready.
Yeah. Your average speaker of a language has never thought about how they use their tongue to make a sound, how their ears process sounds, how they categorize sounds they hear. And so when you want to change your accent, you actually have to somehow get past this lack of knowledge and start becoming aware of things you've never had to think about before.
And I suppose a lot of people come to see us because they are in a new place and in a new workplace as well, and that's when they realise that perhaps there is something that they might need help with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you go looking out there for help for how to change your accent, one of the most frustrating things that there's all these people with solutions, and you'll find conflicting information about how you should do this and you shouldn't do that, and how to make your accent change easy, how to make it so easy and things. Well, fundamentally, it's not easy.
No, it's changing your behaviour.
It's changing your behaviour about things you've never thought about before. And on top of that, you've got people who either, because it's such a difficult issue, they're trying to understand it and they come up with different theories about how things should be done in order to change successfully. And then, unfortunately, you've also got people who, because they know that people need help, they'll try and think of products to sell, which may or may not be actually based on any serious strategy for fixing something.
And fundamentally, speech is human communication, so the ingredients are humans. And so the best way to do that is by
interacting with humans.
And also mindfully learning about what is important.
Precisely.
But there's no one way of doing it, is what we're saying.
Yeah. So not only do people learn in different ways and have a whole pile of different experience behind them, but you actually have to be paying attention to a whole pile of different types of incoming information.
Yes.
So if somebody tells you that you should not listen to any recordings because, in fact, what you need to do is understand what your tongue is doing, they're not thinking about how normal language learning, even in children, works. If somebody tells you you should only listen and not think about what your tongue is doing, well, the problem is that your habits shape what you're likely to do with your tongue. So there's a balance there that needs to be struck. And of course, there's all sorts of helpful YouTube videos out there, and there's books about accent change and so on. And you can gain some information from them that will help. But once you get past those fairly basic steps, that's a sort of like explanation of knowledge or communication of knowledge, but it's not getting to that practical point and test of whether or not you can make the change successfully. That's a really fundamental difference between these sort of fairly poor approaches to accent training at a very basic level and what is really necessary in order to achieve successful change.
And I guess another thing that's quite important is that we're both linguists and phoneticians, so we are not approaching this accent idea as even a problem. It's not a problem, it's not a pathology, so we're very mindful of people's first languages in many cases, and the kinds of difference between the languages that then become a skill that people can pick up on.
Precisely.
Learning different sounds.
So one of the biggest discussions we have to have with clients at the beginning is that it's not bad to have an accent which differs from your environment, but of course if people can't understand you, then something needs to be done to make life work better. Okay? It's fine to have an accent which identifies your background if that's what you're happy with. You don't have to sound local in any context, you just have to sound whichever way you want to sound, as long as people understand you successfully. So there's so much knowledge which has to be dealt with when you're trying to change your accent, and it's important that you're getting the right knowledge and not just big generalizations that are at a fairly basic level.
Yeah, and I suppose another thing to add here is that certain strategies that we teach people work better for some individuals and not others. So it's very individual as to what is going to work for some people from particular backgrounds.
Yeah, and I mean, if somebody isn't having any success with a particular approach to trying to fix a problem, well, then you have to find alternative solutions, and that's what you can't find in books or on YouTube or, in fact, from the majority of trainers elsewhere in the world. You need somebody who understands what's actually going on in here and in here at the same time, and how things are being organised, and why things go wrong when you try to do something which somebody's already explained to you. When you go looking for resources to help you change your accent, make sure that the resources are trustworthy, make sure that you don't get bogged down in detail that isn't relevant for the problems you have, because you're not going to have every problem in every book or in every YouTube video. Make sure it's relevant for the dialect spoken in the area you're in. There's no point in looking at most American materials, for instance. Many British materials will work, but if you're living in Australia, in the end, you need something that is at the very least fairly Australian. And in fact, you don't even need to learn all the symbols used in the International Phonetic Alphabet. We know how to use them because we know how to transcribe speech and analyse speech. But there's no need for a client to relearn or even learn for the first time all those symbols unless it's actually giving them a particular value in the context of whatever their learning goals are.
And it's true that there's a lot of material that's audio, and so people can actually use audio examples these days, and we recommend certain ones.
You definitely need to be able to listen carefully, and that's not something that happens immediately. Just listening for the first time is not enough. You need to be learning to listen to yourself and to others and trying to compare, and that often requires help from someone else. And perhaps using some of the written materials or YouTube videos that are out there, but in the end, you've got to use good resources and appropriate resources.
Absolutely.
So whatever your goals are, we wish you good luck. I'm Dr. Duncan Markham.
I'm Dr. Debbie Loakes.
We're Ear and Speak here in Melbourne, Australia. Bye-bye.